Hey, I'm Lee Balcom, and I keep getting questions from people about how do I get this connection thing started, right? How do I do it? And what they really are asking is how can I the fastest way possible get the connection going and get back to where we were? Because as many people tell me, the fire was burning at one point. I mean, let's face it, at the beginning of the relationship, it's likely that the fire was there because you got married. And then something happened that flame went out. And so the question is, how do we get back to that fire? How do we rebuild the fire of our relationship and what we want to have together, the chemistry of that together? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But first, I want to tell you a couple of stories. The first one was just recently, the show on TV Survivor, which my family has watched from the very beginning days. And when we watched as a family back then, we would all talk about the psychology of what was going on in the playing. Even then, we would use something like a TV show to talk about the psychology, hopefully not psychiatry, but the psychology that we would often see going on and the games behind it all and the game theory that was behind it. And that's even become more pronounced as people have figured out how to play the game differently. And if you're familiar with the show, at the very end, there are three people who are playing for that $1 million prize. And the person who wins that last challenge gets to say who is going to be eliminated through the fire challenge. And so it's down to four at that point. They're going for the final three. And so that person gets to choose this person against this person in a fire setting match. Sometimes they'll do it themselves. They'll take on the person because they want to prove that they could take that on, but they're doing a fire challenge. And so what they have is this string that goes across an upright, and there's a flag attached. And you have to burn through the string, and when you do, the flag pops up, and whoever gets that string burnt and the flag up first gets to go on as the third person, right? The person who wins, and then there are two other people. So here is this person who's won the challenge. There are four people at that point. They're trying to get down to three. And so they say, this person and this person are going to take on the fire challenge. Well, if you've watched that, it's very interesting because there are lots of processes to get that fire started, but it's basically the same strategy that happens, right? You've got to start with the little pieces of coconut or whatever, and you get them going, and you put on some twigs, and you keep on going, and have a little fire starter, so they got to get their spark going, and sometimes even that's a problem, but here they go, getting their fire started and getting it going and blowing on it and getting it going and building it up, and suddenly you have this flame that's finally there that brings them to the final point. They win. I'm not just telling you this out of the blue, right? There is a point. So, story number two. This past weekend, my wife and I had the chance to go spend the weekend with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law in the mountains. And so here we are where I am, looking outside. It is feeling pretty toasty. It's feeling summery. So we have higher temperatures and lots of humidity. I'm wearing my short sleeves, and here I am in the heat. And so they invited us to come up for the weekend and spend a couple of nights with them in a cabin that they had or were using. And so up we went, and suddenly we went from being hot to being cold. Like it went from being in the upper 60s, low 70s at night to there being like 40 degrees. And so when we got there, the first night I'd shown up in my short sleeves and short pants, and I had to pull on a parka, and I had to pull on some jeans because I was used to the heat, and we had to build a fire. And here we were in the beginning of summer, and we're building a fire, and we had a fire both nights we were there, not just because it was pretty. I mean, plenty of people do that outside during the summer, but it's because we needed the heat. We needed to have something to keep us warm. And so my brother-in-law and I he mostly did it, but the same kind of thing. We were cutting up some wood to get some pieces together, and you put a little bit of paper underneath there, and he's starting the fire, and we're starting to build it up, and we're putting on the dry wood, and finally we have this nice roaring fire. Once it's burning, you just put on a log, right? So. You may be wondering, why is Lee telling me all about this when what I want is some help on how to save my marriage and get the connection back? That's my point. How do you build the connection? How do you build the fire back? I've seen lots of mistakes, and so I want to kind of use that idea of how do you build a fire, because what I've noticed from when I was a child, other than the times when I watched my father or someone else kind of cheat by taking some kerosene or gasoline and dumping it on the fire and woof, getting the accelerant going, you do it the same way. You start with a tiny little whatever, whether it's twigs or little branches or pine needles, or you've got some fire starter or some paper or something. You got just some little fuel, right? That's the first piece. It's down. Then you actually have to have something that's lighting the flame, something that will give you a flame, whether it's a fire starter or if you're lucky you have a lighter or a match, something that's going to start the process. Doesn't have to be big, but somebody's got to do that. Somebody's got to light the little pieces. And then what do? This is where mistakes are made. You burn through the little pieces really fast, but you haven't done anything else. Or as soon as you see the flame, you start dumping the big logs on top, trying to get it to catch on fire. You smother it in some way. Or you don't give it enough fuel, little bits of fuel. You start it, right? I've seen this many times where somebody will start the fire. So they work at it, and then they do nothing to build it. Now, I've seen both of these mistakes in terms of a relationship. So I've seen some people that go from like having not much connection to just pouring on the connection. They're going to do everything they can, any and everything. They're going to try to date and try to give them big gifts and take them on trips and smother them with affection and tell them how much they love them and all that. And it's just so much that it smothers out whatever they're trying to build. I've also seen people who start the process and they actually get the flame started, but then they don't nurture it along. They don't give it a little energy, blowing on it, giving it a little bit of heat, getting it built up so that they can keep adding on. And so one mistake is you put everything on top and you smother it. The other is you don't give it anything to build up. It's just the starting point. You get started. You maybe find their love language and speak a little bit, or maybe you take some other action that starts the flame a little bit. And then you go, well, I've done everything I can. Well, we'll see what happens from there. That doesn't work either. The other possibility is you keep staying small. You can keep a little fire going, right? You can pull little twigs on, put a little twigs on, put a little twigs on, pull little leaves on. I mean, I've seen this many times with, especially with scouts, where they were just throwing these little pieces along the way because they didn't understand how to build it up any higher. And because they didn't understand how to build it up any higher, they could keep the flame going, but it was a lot of work, a lot of effort going into it, a lot of combustion going on, but not much heat. So a lot of work for very little heat. That happens in relationships too. You keep doing the small things, a lot of work, but you're not building on it. You're not building it out. So how do you build a fire? First, you have to make sure you've gathered the pieces around you, right? This is another mistake. People start a process and they don't have the fuel to put on it. They don't even understand how to do it, right? And so it's like you have your lighter and you have some twigs and you're going to light that up and you go, oh, what now? I don't know what to do now, right? I started it. I started the flame, but I don't know what to do now. Well, that didn't work. So the first thing you do when you are going to build a fire is you make sure you have something that will start a fire, whatever it is. It's okay even if you're using some old style, you have something that will start the spark. You also have some kindling, some little pieces of something that'll burn very quickly and easily, just enough to build it up. But then you have some bigger pieces, maybe not huge pieces, but some other stuff over there. And then you have some bigger logs, and then you have the logs that are going to sustain the fire. And you have that ready to go. It's gathered somewhere so you are ready to go. You're not going and chopping down the tree once you've started the fire. You've already gathered what you need. You already know in your mind, to translate this over, you already understand in your mind the process you're going to use to recreate the connection that you've lost, to rebuild the fire of your connection. You've already got them in reach. So then the next thing you do is you start by creating a little nest to burn, right? Little pile. If you remember Survivor, it's that pile of coconut that's then shredded out. So it's just waiting. The coconut shell is shredded, it's waiting for the flame. And then they start doing something, they light something, right? You get it going a little bit, and what do you do then? You blow on it. Give it a little oxygen, give it a little room, let it build slowly. And then you start putting some twigs on it. And as the twigs start catching on, you put on bigger pieces. And as the big pieces catch on, you put on a bigger piece until you finally have the fire burning. Now here are a few lessons. Lesson number 1, have the fuel ready. Understand what this process is about in saving your marriage and how you recreate the connection. If you don't understand it, come visit me at savethemarriage.com. Make sure you understand the process. Number 1. Number 2, recognize that it's going to be started small. You're not trying to light the big logs. You're not going for the big stuff. You're going small. Something that is not going to smother every attempt you make or cause your spouse to smother every attempt you make. So you start small and you add the little pieces on along the way. And you keep making it a little bit bigger. You don't stay with the small stuff. You start with the small stuff. You're building towards something else. Third lesson. It takes energy at the beginning. After you've got the fire going, all you're doing is putting a log on or a couple of logs on to keep it going. You can't stop. You can't walk away and go, well, I got the fire going, so now I'm done, because then you're going to be back down to where it's falling apart. Embers finally cold, right? You're going to do that all over again. So you have to keep firing it up. Now, this is the piece that many people tell me, they're like, I can't work this hard the rest of our relationship. And my response is, you don't have to once you get it going, but you may have to put in some effort. But let's think of it another way. Let's think of if you've put in a lot of effort along the way, you've kept it burning. If you stopped, pause button, if you stop putting in the effort, then when you rebuild, you're kind of taking all the energy that you had just very small along the way been consistently able to put in if you'd kept it going, and you've got to put that in all at once just to get it going. But once you get it going, then you're sustaining it. Then it's a matter of keeping the fire going. So that's the other lesson is, yeah, it's going to take some effort. Yes, it's going to take some oxygen and fuel and thinking through it and learning new ways and figuring out how to do it, only so that by the end, all you're doing is putting the big logs on because now you figured it out. Now you've got it, it's going, right? It's keeping you warm. It's got the relationship warm again, right? So then we have this place where we recognize that sometimes it's harder than others to get a fire going. This is another realization. If what you have is wet wood, maybe you really have done some hurt and it's really put a damper on the relationship, right? And I'm not saying you yourself, but you as a couple have not been sustaining this. And so you've got this wood that is not dry. It's harder to get it going. It's not impossible, but it's harder to get it going. Another show that we often watch is Naked and Afraid, and they are always at this calculation of all the wet stuff around them. They've got to get a fire going just to survive. And so part of what they're trying to do is find enough dry pieces, enough pieces of the puzzle to put together so that they can warm up the other stuff. You still have the wood on the side and you put it on and let it dry out and catch on. And so that helps once you've got it going, but you've got to get to the point where the fire is hot enough to warm up and dry out whatever you're going to put on it, whatever fuel comes next. So you have some complicators. And those complicators can be that the damage has been long-term, there's been some hurt and resentment. There's lots of ways that your wood could be wet. And you got to figure out some ways of getting back to that. So yes, sometimes it's more complicated. You see, the thing, sometimes it's not as hard as you think it's going to be because, just like, so back up to the cabin, this wood that the people had at this cabin was dry wood. It burned fast and hot. So once we got it going, it was easy to keep it going. Just put the log on and wait for it to burn and put another log on, wait for it to burn because the wood was dry. It was waiting for a flame to hit it. And the fact is that we humans, because of the way that we're built, we want connection. We're desperate for connection. And sometimes all it takes is a little bit of a flame to get it going because we are so starving for that connection. But we got to build it. And so part of the lesson of the fire is that you start small. You build it slowly. You make sure that you understand the fuel that you need around you to keep it going. And yes, sometimes it's a little harder than others because there are complicators. But that doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you have to think of it that way. So next time you're trying to build connection, one of the things I want you to remember is Lee told me about building the fire. Start small. Start simple. Build slowly. Build it up. And then once it's there, all I'm going to have to do is make sure I keep it going. Not the hard work of getting it going. It's to sustain it, and that's a lot easier. Again, if you need help with that, please come visit me at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. Grab my system. Not only that, but grab my system, which is basically the kindling, understanding of the kindling and how to use the kindling. But join my VIP. I give you a free week of that. That's going to teach you multiple ways to get the kindling on, to light it in multiple ways depending on what's going on. It'll help keep it going. Not only that, but if we have room, I'll also have one of my coaches contact you for a get started session. No charge for that. It's about a 15-20 minute session just to make sure that you're optimized and you're getting that fire going. But take advantage of this. Come meet me at savethemarriage.com. Grab the system. Join my VIP so that you have the extra tools you need. You have the kindling all around. You have the fuel waiting for when you need it. And talk with one of my coaches to make sure that you get started the best way you can. Don't waste the flame. Make sure you figure out how to rebuild the fire so that you can have the relationship that both you and your spouse want. This is Lee Balcom wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage.